Are you religious?
I am not. Yeah, but I grew up with parents who were pretty agnostic, and their parents. I remember, I know my dad's parents being like fresh off the boat Italian immigrants were pretty Catholic, but something somewhere along the line disenfranchised my dad to that, so he raised us pretty agnostic, and I think I'm pretty much on that boat as well. I really like to think that there's something more to life and existence than biology, than physics. I like some of these new agey ideas of like your energy, being transmuted when you die, or those sorts of things kind of hit me in the feels a little bit. It's not just because of the crystal around my neck, but because I like the hope as a bulwark against the terror of finitude.
I think I'm still in my new age adjacent stage, and
Mm-hmm.
I've delved into my ideas on religion and spirituality in previous episodes, so I won't get into it. But
I mean, I'm
I think
curious if you hit me with the bullet points.
it's sort of the idea that we can intuit a level of energy and creative spark that cannot be encapsulated by a more material scientist understanding of the world. And so maybe it is just hopeful thinking. Maybe it is just a bulwark against the creeping fatalism of biological determinism. But I'll go with the idea that intuitively there has to be something that outside of us and our understanding was able to get this creative existential ball rolling.
Whatever it is that we call energy, we just have a variable for that in all of these scientific equations, but we don't know what the nature of energy is.
And I think to support the ideas that we were talking about previously when exploring politics, which is that being open and having humility as a collective, as humanity, and saying that maybe we don't have the ability right now to have a full understanding, and our ancestors maybe weren't so caught up in false superstitious thinking that maybe they were onto something. And as we proceed, progress, and grow our understanding of the world, we might get to the point where we understand the ultimate meaning of the world and how it came to be from just purely mathematical and scientific premises. Or we might just come to the conclusion that there was this sort of energy, transcendent, ineffable beyond what we could understand, that was what really started it. Or this is all a simulation, or it's multiple worlds, or whatever.
We can maybe someday ascertain the source code of the universe, so to speak. Just because we know how something works or where it came from doesn't necessarily tell us anything about its meaning. The classic distinction between is and ought.
Yep. Are you doing anything for self-improvement?
Always, man. I'm kind of a self-improvement junkie, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Especially now that I'm building this business and being confronted with all this stuff that I don't know, all of these like limiting beliefs that I have that I have done a lot to address, but they're always gonna be there, so they're gonna get activated by certain things. And I think this big new pursuit of mine really digs in deep into my psyche and tries to dredge out some of the excuses not to do this hard thing and some of the self-sabotage and stuff like that. So my self-improvement journey is a very constant pursuit and a very active, because I think as I do anything in life, unless I decide like my family might, or like a lot of other people might, to pick a formula and just run it as many times as I can, just iterate and be content with it. Unless I do that, I'm going to be doing different stuff and trying new things. And that's definitely how I want to be living my life, is seeking new stimulation. I have to be honest with myself that I have a lot of ambition, not just to create and build this enterprise and create and build a healthy family, but a lot of ambition to continue experiencing and really get the most out of life that I can. So I think as I'm doing any of that, my programming and all of the stuff deep in my nervous system will be reiterated and reactivated. So the journey of self-improvement for me is kind of operating in the background. It's by now a pretty automated part of my daily routine. where there's multiple times per day that I journal, and at least one of those documents in my notes app every day is just called Mind Declutter and the date, where I'm just typing. It ends up being a page or two of text, just whatever's going on in here. There's always a lot bouncing around in my head. And I think even more crucially and more transformative for me over the past couple of years is once I've gotten all of that out, I then connect to how any of that is affecting my body. Speaking of new agey stuff, I've heard a lot of people referring to the body as the emotional brain, or as the seat of the emotions. I've even heard people who are deep into like Jungian psychology, talk about the body as the unconscious mind. And so once I can quiet all the stories and nonsense going on in my brain a little bit, then I breathe into my emotional body, so to speak, and just see what's going on in there and how much of that is causing some of these stories and how those stories are affecting any of what's going on in my body. And I do that a couple of times a day. You were at my last workshop where I recommended that as a practice for everyone, just a really, really rudimentary mindfulness practice that you don't need to keep track of or measure, right? But anytime you're starting to feel, you could even just call it tension. Anytime you're starting to feel stuff that seems to be interrupting your day or your flow, that's a moment to breathe into your body, just check in. So I do this a few times a day, and it helps me to notice. From there, I get to plan out, I get to outline what is worth acting upon and what isn't. If I didn't have this awareness that a lot of anxiety is bubbling up from my gut and into my neck and causing tension there, and maybe even making my face kind of hot and sweaty because I'm anxious about the 6 remaining things on my to-do list. If I wasn't aware of all of that, then I would just be trying my best to do whatever I can right now to resolve that discomfort. And I wouldn't be able to tactically approach, because maybe all 6 of those things on my to-do list don't need to be done today. But if I'm not aware of the anxiety around that to-do list, then I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself to get those 6 things done ASAP. So I'm exacerbating the anxiety I already feel, which creates this feedback loop, right? I'm doing things in a hurry. I'm not taking the time to decide which ones are more important. A lot of times what I'll do in this example of a to-do list, I'll address whatever's going on in my body, and then I'm like, okay, what are the 2 things on this list that would relieve the most of that anxiety? Okay, and what are the 2 things on this list that need to get done the soonest? If there's any overlap there, that's just where I start. So it's pretty tactical at that point, but the bulk of the work is the pausing to gain some awareness of what the hell is even going on internally. And these are tools that I've gotten from therapy, from a lot of self-help podcasts and workshops that I've done. Those are where I get kind of new pieces to try and incorporate into my self-development suite.
I just want to say I appreciate you trying to share what you're learning and your tactics and your ideas and what you've discovered.
Yeah, while I hope to make one-to-one coaching or even 2-to-1 coaching with partners my bread and butter, I think it takes a lot for people to be able to receive that and to be in a space where they can be given real suggestions, and then I'm going to email them in 3 days and see how that suggestion went, right? Because there's a lot of accountability involved in that. And I think that's where the bulk of the transformation can happen. But I think you're right that having content like these workshops that I'm doing, where we can all just kind of come together and talk about this thing. I present some information and some of these suggestions, and you can kind of take it or leave it. It provides a lot of people an entry point into self-development, where a lot of men in particular don't want to just start therapy. And a lot of people who have been in therapy for a while don't want to hire a coach or get a better therapist, because then they've got to tell their story all over again. And that takes up 3 or 4 sessions, and they're paying $150, $200, $250 per session for someone who's good, right? So I thank you for that, man, because that actually increases my motivation to keep going with the workshops.
Of course. What's something you regret?
Great question. Hard left turn. I think 2 things come to mind. One of the times I lived with my mom briefly as I was like bouncing back and forth. I tried again one last time. I was in 7th grade or entering 7th grade, and I missed my brother a lot. There was a point a few years before that where my brother and I were both living with my dad and my stepmom, and he did something worthy of discipline, and they decided to ship him off to go live with my mom in Sacramento. That was pretty tough because he was just like in childhood in Montana. He was kind of the interactions I had with him and playing outside were kind of a safe haven, kind of a refuge. And he's still one of my favorite people to this day. So that was tough. And I didn't really get a warning about it. I just came home from school one day and he wasn't there. And then my parents told me, but I missed my brother. And I was hoping at that point, I was aware that my mom wasn't always present, but I wasn't fully aware that she was struggling with alcoholism. And I was hoping that my being there would like save her or something, right? This is my Prince Charming complex. And thought like if she's got both of her sons there, like she'll be all right. So I moved in with them and I lived there for a few months and started 7th grade in Sacramento, actually, and loved all the time that I got with my brother. And my mom just still wasn't around very much. And even a lot of the weekdays, she would get home at like 10:30, 11 p.m. and like drunk. And so I got really overwhelmed with that and really tired of that. And I made up some story about being bullied at school and how that was the reason that I wanted to leave. And I think I regret the dishonesty of that. I can give myself some grace because I was in 7th grade, right? But I do regret the dishonesty of that, and I regret not being able to tell my mom. I think the deeper regret in that is not being able to tell her that I wanted her around. That's what I really needed. I didn't necessarily need to leave. I needed some quality time with my mom, and I needed to like repair that relationship. I opted to leave and go back to a more stable situation. And the way I went about it was dishonest. I admitted that to her at a certain point many years later, and we've talked through that and stuff. That's one regret.
I know you mentioned your dad had owned up to how he had hurt you when you were growing up and he had been so domineering. Has your mother owned up to her alcoholism and how that damaged you, or you guys have not had that reckoning?
We have not. And I think I don't have enough contact with my mom to have a really good perspective on where she's at in her journey. My aunt's perspective, who's her younger sister, she is making more of an effort, at least to not be drunk around family so that there's more quality time to be had when we all do get together for Thanksgiving and stuff, which seems like a positive development. But there's never been any conscious acknowledgement even of her alcoholism in general. And that's a conversation that I will eventually have. That's definitely something important to me, to not just shame her and like hold her accountable or whatever, but just to say like, I wanted you around and I want you in my life. And it's hard because sober mom is one of my favorite people and drunk mom is hard to be around.
Has she acknowledged that she has a problem with alcohol, or is this sort of like a family open secret?
I think it's been brought up a couple of times, and call it an open secret is pretty close to the reality of it, because it has been brought up a couple of times, especially with my brother and his wife. They have confronted her about it before because she sees them more often. They both live in Sacramento. So they spend more time together, and they've had her babysit their kids and wanted to say like, look, we know, let's not pretend you don't drink a 12-pack of Bud Light every day. I just don't want that to be happening when you're alone with my kids, or something to that effect. They were probably much more gentle about that conversation. So it has been confronted, and from my understanding, it hasn't gone very well. There's been a lot of pushback and stuff. So how to approach that conversation is beyond my current capacity, and it probably will be a collaborative effort with my brother, because I think we might be two people that she would listen to. But yeah, thanks for asking, man, because that's deep and insightful. And like, speaking of self-development, like repairing one's relationship with your family members is one of the sort of end game goals of that. So I appreciate that.
Oh, of course. To shift to a more positive frame, what's the best decision you've made in life?
Getting divorced. I think that was by far the best decision I've ever made. A lot of people might hear that as an indictment of my ex, and I definitely don't intend that. She's a wonderful person. We just want very different things out of life, and we were forced to acknowledge that when a pandemic hit and I started grad school. So like, the future came into really sharp focus, right? That's essentially all that happened. I think we were both operating according to that Disney-fied, as long as you're in love, everything else will sort itself out kind of way of operating that I think is still pretty prevalent and still damaging a lot of people's relationships and not to mention their autonomy. That's damaging to that balance that we keep talking about between this eternal human struggle between I need love and belonging and I need my own unique identity to be valued. So I think the best decision I ever made was finally acknowledging that I needed my own unique identity to be valued, to finally acknowledge that there was even a conflict there, and that just being loved and making sure I belonged wasn't enough to live a whole life. I got to acknowledge that and start to explore that unique individual identity on my own terms. And that's really built everything that I am and everything that I'm doing now.
Definitely the right decision. Last three questions. These are the fun ones. Let's see. What's your favorite book?
Such a good question. There is a book by Michael Chabon. He's pretty well known in like the fiction circles.
Telegraph Avenue?
Telegraph Avenue is one of my favorites of his. And he wrote The Yiddish Policeman's Union. He wrote Wonder Boys. These like pretty well known books. My favorite of his was the one that won him the Pulitzer. It's called Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. And it's this story, I don't want to call it a classic rags to riches story because it has so much more depth than that. This young Jewish kid seeks refuge in New York City from Nazi-occupied Prague, moves in with his cousin in New York City, and through kind of happenstance series of events, they discover that the kid from Prague is a really good artist and the kid living in New York City is a really good writer. And this is right in American history when comic books are starting to become a thing. So they start making comic books together. They end up building this amazing empire, this comic book empire from literal scratch. It's just this really intricately woven web of deep stories that it hits me every time. I've read the book like 3 times and it hits me differently every time.
I didn't know you liked novels. We spoke about books on Wednesday and it seemed like you weren't too into novels, but you are. So
I read novels at like twice the clip that I read nonfiction. I mean, I've always got one of each going. I've got like a psychology, philosophy, self-development kind of book in one hand and then a novel in the other.
Favorite movie?
My favorite movie is Grand Budapest Hotel by Wes Anderson. I like all of his movies that like art house style with like a non-linear plot that just really kind of focuses on the characters and their internal conflicts and stuff is like really cool for me. For something a little bit more linear but still very adventurous and fun with a lot of development and more humorous dialogue, I like a lot of the Coen brothers movies. So I think number 2 for me is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
I love the Coen brothers. Wes Anderson is, I think, an acquired taste, and I'm still sort of on the fence about him just because of like the quirky pastel colored set design and decor. It's a little too cute for its own good sometimes. And has this sort of like whimsical juvenile aesthetic, but I do think he's a great director. And Coen brothers, I love the Coen brothers, and I think A Serious Man is probably top 5 movies ever. Last question. Favorite album?
The new J. Cole is fire.
Okay, yeah, I like that one. I
don't know if that's my favorite, but that is, I've already listened to it a few times through.
Yeah. I didn't like that he removed the diss song against Kendrick. What was that all about?
I think he didn't want anything to do with that beef. He's J. Cole, he's got a family, he's trying to make his music and his money and like not have that much attention. Like, look what happened to Drake too. Like, this is what happens when you diss Kendrick. When you diss one of the greatest rappers of all time, like you're gonna get eviscerated.
Nah, but I love Kendrick. I still got J. Cole if they beefed.
The most impactful album that I've experienced was the Blonde album by Frank Ocean. Just an emotional journey, and every track just hits so hard, and it's like minimalistic production, and some of the songs are even like just a minute and a half long, and there's only like 15 lines of lyrics. But you're like, holy. I rediscovered that album. I had heard the hits from it, Solo, Pink and White, when it came out. But then I listened to it all the way through multiple times. And that was like post-divorce again, where, now I have all of this time and autonomy to explore and like rediscover these things, all of this great artistic content that I've neglected for so long. Because I'm not forced to sit on the couch every night and watch some shitty TV series with my wife.
Shots fired.
So Poison Ivy hit me, Self-Control.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, the whole whole album is just such a gold mine.
Well, Zach, it's been amazing. It's been great talking to you.
Hell yeah, man. I love our conversations, love chopping it up with you.
Well, nice talking to you, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you for being part of the What's Like in podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.